They mocked the broke single dad, invited him to sing at the Billionaire CEO's Gala just for laughs. One raw note later. The room froze. Phones dropped. Even Sheetha, untouchable Victoria Langford, couldn't hide the tears. What happened next changed everything forever. Alex Rivera had learned long ago that the world didn't pause for people like him. At 34, he moved through life quietly, the way shadows move across walls, always there, rarely noticed. Every night from 10 until 6 in the morning, he pushed a heavy industrial mop across the gleaming marble corridors of Evergreen Academy. The kind of elite private school where tuition costs more per year than he'd earned in the last decade combined. The floors shone like mirrors under his careful strokes, reflecting back a man who looked older than his years. Dark circles under hazel eyes. A faint scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood fall he never talked about, and hands roughened by years of labor and grief. He wore the same Navy uniform every shift, the name tag reading Alex in neat white stitching, though most of the staff and students never bothered to use it. To them, he was simply the night guy, the invisible force that made their privileged world sparkle by dawn. 5 years earlier, when his wife Alina died after a sudden, brutal battle with leukemia, Alex had promised himself 2 things. Sophia would never feel the weight of their loss the way he did, and she would have every chance Alina had dreamed for her. Sophia was 9 now, small for her age, with her mother's wide brown eyes and a gift for the piano that seemed almost unfair in its brightness. She had tested into Evergreen on a merit scholarship that covered 60% of the tuition, but the remaining 40% still arrived like a monthly punch to the stomach. Alex worked doubles whenever he could, picked up weekend landscaping jobs, skipped meals so Sophia could have new sheet music or a decent winter coat. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself he was fine. Most nights, he believed it. That particular afternoon, however, everything shifted in a way he hadn't seen coming. He was finishing the East Wing, polishing the brass handrails outside the auditorium when Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, the Gala committee chair and a woman who always smelled faintly of expensive gardenia perfume, approached him with the deliberate smile people reserve for charity cases. She was dressed in a cream silk blouse and tailored trousers, her silver hair swept into a flawless chignon. Alex straightened instinctively, wiping his hands on the sides of his uniform pants. "Alex," she began, voice bright and practiced. "We're so glad we caught you before you left for the day." He nodded once, wary. People like Mrs. Hargrove didn't usually catch him unless they needed something moved or cleaned up faster. "The gala is this Saturday," she continued, folding her arms as though sharing a delightful secret. "You know how important it is, our biggest fundraiser of the year. Victoria Langford herself is giving the keynote this time. Can you imagine? The Victoria Langford." She paused for effect, waiting for awe that didn't come. Alex had heard the name. Everyone had. The billionaire CEO of Langford Tech, youngest self-made woman to crack the Forbes list. A face that appeared on magazine covers and business panels with the same cool, unreadable expression. To Alex, she was simply another name on a donor plaque. "We've decided to honor our unsung heroes this year," Mrs. Hargrove went on. "The people who keep this place running behind the scenes. And we thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if you performed? Just one song. Nothing elaborate. A little surprise for our guests. It'll be fun." The word fun landed like a stone in still water. Alex felt the ripple of it in his chest. He knew exactly what this was. He'd seen it before, the awkward talent show moments where someone's uncle tried to juggle and everyone clapped politely while stifling laughter. Only this time the punchline was supposed to be Hema, single dad in faded work boots, singing in front of tuxedos and evening gowns. A joke wrapped in kindness. The kind rich people loved because it let them feel generous without actually risking anything. He opened his mouth to decline. The words were already forming, "Thank you, but I don't sing in public," when he pictured Sophia's face. Earlier that morning, she'd been practicing Chopin in the living room of their small two-bedroom apartment, fingers flying over the second-hand upright they'd bought on Craigslist. When he told her about the long shift ahead, she'd hugged him fiercely and whispered, "You're my hero, Dad, even if no one else sees it." If he said no now, he'd be proving the world right, that people like him stayed invisible. Mrs. Hargrove tilted her head, smile unwavering. "Sophia would love it, don't you think? Seeing her dad up on that big stage. We'll put you right after the silent auction. Perfect timing." Alex swallowed. His throat felt dry. "I'll think about it." "Wonderful," she exclaimed, clapping once as though he'd already agreed. "We'll list you in the program. Something simple maybe, an old classic. You decide. Rehearsal isn't necessary. Just show up ready to shine." She walked away before he could respond, heels clicking down the corridor like tiny, triumphant drumbeats. He stood there for a long minute, mop handle still in his grip, staring at the spotless floor. His reflection looked back at him, tired, uncertain, but not defeated. Not yet. That evening, when he picked Sophia up from after-school music club, she bounded into the car with sheet music clutched to her chest. "Guess what?" she said before he could even start the engine. "Mrs. Patel told everyone you're singing at the gala. Everyone's talking about it." Alex's stomach dropped. "They told the kids already." Sophia nodded, eyes huge and shining. "They said it's going to be the best surprise ever." "Dad, are you really going to sing? Like, on the actual stage?" He looked at Horelli, her cheeks were flushed with excitement, her ponytail slightly askew from running to meet him. For the first time in years, he saw something other than worry or tiredness in her expression. He saw hope. "Yeah," he said quietly, starting the car. "Yeah, sweetheart. I'm going to sing." As they drove home through the fading winter light, Alex gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. He didn't know what song he would choose, or how his voice unused for anything but lullabies and shower singing would hold up under those bright lights. He only knew one thing for certain: Saturday night, in front of the richest, most powerful people in the city. The joke would be on them, and maybe, just maybe, he'd finally let the world hear. The man he'd been keeping hidden all these years. The Evergreen Academy Gala unfolded like a scene from a world Alex Rivera had only glimpsed through half-open doors while pushing his cleaning cart. Saturday evening arrived, crisp and starlit, the kind of night that made the school's sprawling campus look like a movie set. Valet attendants in crisp black vests whisked away Bentleys and Rolls-Royces, while strings of fairy lights draped the entrance to the grand auditorium, turning the marble steps into a runway for silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. Inside, the air carried the mingled scents of orchids, expensive cologne, and the faint metallic temps of champagne flutes clinking in celebration. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks overhead, casting golden pools of light across tables set with bone china and silver place cards bearing names Alex recognized only from donor plaques and news headlines. He had arrived early, slipping in through the service entrance he knew best, still wearing his navy janitor's jacket over the one decent black button-down he owned, the same shirt he'd worn to Elena's funeral, now pressed and starched but carrying the faint, stubborn memory of grief in its fibers. Sophia had helped him knot the tie, her small fingers fumbling with the silk until it sat crooked but proud. "You look like a prince, Dad," she'd said, beaming up at him. He'd kissed the top of her head and promised her he'd do his best. Now, standing backstage in the dim wings, he felt anything but princely. The murmur of the arriving crowd filtered through the heavy velvet curtain. Laughter, greetings, the low buzz of networking. Every so often a name floated by senators, tech moguls, philanthropists, and Alex's stomach tightened further. He peeked through a gap in the curtain. The house was filling fast. Sophia sat in the front row, center, in the navy dress they'd found at a consignment shop. Her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes wide with anticipation. She kept glancing toward the stage as though willing him to appear early. Around her, parents and designer labels chatted animatedly, their children scrolling on phones or whispering behind manicured hands. Alex spotted Mrs. Hargrove gliding between tables, air-kissing cheeks and accepting compliments on the decor. She caught his eye once through the gap and gave a quick, encouraging wave, the same wave one might give a nervous child at a school play. It did nothing to settle the storm inside him. Then the lights dimmed slightly, and a hush fell as Victoria Langford stepped onto the stage for her keynote. She moved with the effortless command of someone who had never doubted her place in any room. At 38, she wore a sleek, midnight blue gown that caught the light like liquid obsidian. Her dark hair swept into an elegant low chignon, diamond studs glinting at her ears. No notes in hand. She spoke directly to the audience about innovation, legacy, and the responsibility of wealth in an unequal world. Her voice was measured, precise, carrying the quiet authority that had built a $50 billion tech empire from a garage startup. The crowd listened, raptly, some nodding in agreement. Others simply captivated by the woman who seemed to have everything under control. Alex watched from the wings, feeling the distance between their worlds more acutely than ever. She finished a warm applause, offered a small, practiced smile, and returned to her seat in the front row, just 2 chairs away from Sophia. The MC, a silver-haired alumnus with a broadcaster's polish, took the microphone next. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, voice booming through the sound system. "Before we move to the silent auction results, we have a very special surprise. This year, in the spirit of honoring our unsung heroes, the people who keep Evergreen running smoothly behind the scenes, we've invited one of our own to share a moment of talent with us. Please put your hands together for Alex Rivera." The applause started politely, then fractured into scattered chuckles as heads turned, searching for the unfamiliar name. Phones lifted from laps, cameras angled toward the stage in anticipation of whatever awkward spectacle was about to unfold. Alex heard the whispers ripple outward like wind through dry leaves. "The janitor? This should be good. Poor guy, hope he doesn't faint." Someone in the back actually laughed outright, quickly shushed by a companion. Mrs. Hargrove beamed from her table, clearly pleased with the fun she had orchestrated. Alex's heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought the microphone might pick it up. He stepped forward anyway, legs feeling wooden, the spotlight blinding as it snapped on. The stage felt vast and empty under his work boots. He carried no guitar, no sheet music, just himself and the crumpled lyric page in his pocket he no longer needed. He glanced down at Sophia. Her eyes shone with fierce, unwavering belief. That look alone kept him from turning and fleeing. He approached the microphone stand, adjusted it slightly with hands that trembled only a little, and took one deep breath. The room quieted in expectation of failure, of amusement, of the quick end to an uncomfortable moment. Victoria Langford, seated with perfect posture, glanced at her watch, then lifted her gaze to the stage with mild curiosity, the way one might regard a mildly interesting sideshow. Alex closed his eyes for a heartbeat, remembering Elena's voice singing the same song to Sophia in the hospital bed, soft and sure. Then he opened his mouth and let the first note fall into the silence. Alex stood alone under the spotlight, the microphone inches from his lips, the auditorium stretching out before him like an ocean of expectant faces. The whispers had faded into a curious hush. Phones remained raised, but now more out of habit than mockery. He felt the weight of every eye on him, judging, waiting for the stumble, the crack, the polite laughter that would follow. His heart thundered so loudly he was sure the front row could hear it. Sophia sat perfectly still, her small hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. But her gaze never wavered from his face. That look, pure, unshakable faith, was the only anchor he had. He closed his eyes, shutting out the glittering crowd, the chandeliers, the woman in midnight blue who had already glanced away once. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw Elena's hospital room at 3 a.m, her thin hand in his, Sophia asleep in the chair beside them. He heard Elena's soft voice humming the opening bars of Hallelujah, the old Leonard Cohen song she loved because it held both brokenness and beauty in the same breath. That memory steadied him. He drew in a slow, deep breath, the way singers do when they're about to give everything they have left, and let the first note emerge. It began low, almost a whisper, gravel-edged, carrying the weariness of too many sleepless nights and the quiet strength of a man who had carried grief alone for years. I've heard there was a secret chord. The words floated into the room like smoke, curling around the silence. No one moved. The note hung there, rich and resonant, vibrating in the chest of every listener, whether they wanted it to or not. Then he climbed into the first verse, voice opening like a door long locked, revealing layers no one had suspected existed beneath the janitor's uniform. Each phrase was measured, deliberate, yet utterly unguarded. Pain and love and longing poured out without apology. The melody wrapped itself around the auditorium, intimate and enormous at once, as though he were singing not to 500 strangers, but to one person who had once loved him completely and was no longer there to hear it. Halfway through the first chorus, Hallelujah, Hallelujah, something shifted in the room. The phones began to lower, one by one. A woman in the third row pressed a silk-gloved hand to her mouth. A silver-haired businessman who had been checking stock prices on his watch froze, eyes glistening unexpectedly. Sophia's lips parted in awe. She had heard her father sing lullabies 1,000 times, but never like this, never with the full force of everything he kept buried. Even the waitstaff stationed along the walls with trays of untouched canapes stopped what they were doing and turned fully toward the stage. Victoria Langford, who prided herself on never being caught off guard, felt the sound hit her like a physical force. She had been half listening, mind already drifting to tomorrow's board meeting, when that first verse reached her. Now, she sat rigid, hands folded in her lap, the cool composure that had carried her through hostile takeovers and public scrutiny cracking at the edges. His voice wasn't trained in the classical sense, no vibrato flourishes, no operatic polish, but it was honest in a way she had forgotten was possible. Every note carried history, the loss of a wife, the exhaustion of endless double shifts, the fierce love for a daughter who deserved better than the hand life had dealt them. It was the sound of someone who had been broken and kept going anyway. Victoria's throat tightened. She hadn't cried in public since she was 22, standing alone at her mother's grave after the funeral she'd paid for but never grieved. Yet here, in this glittering room full of people who admired her power more than her humanity, tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely, but they came anyways, low, silent, unstoppable. By the final chorus, the entire audience was caught. No one clapped prematurely. No one whispered. They simply listened as Alex's voice climbed one last time, holding the high note with a quiet power that seemed to pull the air from the room. When the last hallelujah faded, soft, almost a sight of silence that followed was absolute. 3 full seconds of stunned stillness, as though the world had paused to catch its breath. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single pair of hands began to clap. Another joined. Then a wave, fierce, thunderous, rising until every person in the auditorium was on their feet. Whistles pierced the air. Shouts of bravo and encore echoed off the high ceiling. Tears streamed openly down faces that had arrived expecting entertainment and instead received revelation. Alex stood motionless, chest heaving, eyes wide with disbelief as the ovation washed over him. He looked down at Sophia, first her face shining with pride, tears tracking down her cheeks as she clapped harder than anyone. Then his gaze drifted across the sea of standing figures until it landed on Victoria. She was standing too, applauding steadily, her expression no longer guarded or distant. For the first time that night, she looked at him not as the janitor, not as a novelty act, but as a man who had just reminded her that some things, some voices could still reach the places she had long ago sealed shut. The lights brightened slightly. The MC hurried back to the microphone, voice thick with emotion he hadn't anticipated. Well, I think we can all agree that was no ordinary performance. Laughter rippled through the applause, warm now, genuine. Alex managed a small, dazed smile, bowed once awkwardly and stepped back into the wings, legs trembling beneath him. The joke was over. Something far greater had just begun. The ovation still echoed in Victoria Langford's ears long after the auditorium lights had brightened and the crowd began to disperse into clusters of animated conversation. She remained seated for a full minute after most had risen, hands clasped in her lap. The faint tremor in her fingers, the only outward sign that something inside her had shifted irrevocably. She had built her life on control, every decision calculated, every emotion measured, every relationship transactional. Yet tonight, a single voice, unpolished and unguarded, had slipped past every defense she had so carefully constructed. When she finally stood, her movements were deliberate, almost reluctant, as though she were walking toward something she both craved and feared. She didn't head for the exit or the cluster of donors already waiting to congratulate her on her speech. Instead, she turned toward the side corridor that led backstage. Heels clicking softly against the polished wood, like the ticking of a clock she could no longer ignore. Backstage was quieter. The energy of the performance already dissipating into the practicalities of breakdown. Stagehands rolling cables. A few lingering volunteers stacking programs. Alex stood near the prop table, Sophia wrapped around his waist in a fierce hug, her face buried against his shirt. He was murmuring something low and soothing into her hair. One hand gently stroking her back, while the other still clutched the microphone cord he hadn't yet handed off. His shoulders sagged slightly now that the adrenaline had ebbed, revealing the exhaustion he usually hid so well. Victoria paused at the edge of the shadows, suddenly uncertain. Approaching him felt strangely intimate, as though she were intruding on a private moment rather than offering professional courtesy. But she had never been one to retreat once she'd decided on a course of action. She cleared her throat softly. Alex looked up, startled, his hazel eyes widening when he recognized her. Sophia peeked out from his side, curiosity replacing tears. "Mr. Rivera," Victoria began, voice lower and warmer than the crisp tone she used in boardrooms. "That was extraordinary, doesn't begin to cover it." She took a small step closer, hands loose at her sides to signal she meant no formality. "I've heard countless performances benefits, galas, private concerts, but nothing like what you just gave us. It wasn't just beautiful. It was honest." Alex blinked, still processing the fact that Victoria Langford was speaking to him directly. "Thank you, Ms. Langford," he said quietly, voice rough from the effort of singing. "I didn't expect anyone to really listen. I just wanted to make Sophia proud." He glanced down at his daughter, who was now staring at Victoria with wide-eyed wonder. Victoria followed his gaze, softening further. "She has every reason to be proud. And so do you." She hesitated, then continued, the words coming more easily than she anticipated. "Your daughter Sophia, correct? She's on a partial scholarship here. I checked the records after your performance." Alex tensed instinctively, protective. Victoria raised a hand in gentle reassurance. I'd like to change that. Full ride, effective, immediately. And private music lessons with the best instructor we can find, someone who can nurture what she already has. No strings attached. No expectations. Just because tonight reminded me that some things matter more than quarterly reports. Alex stared at her for a long moment, searching her face for the catch he was certain must exist. People like Victoria didn't offer generosity without purpose. He'd learned that lesson early. Why? He asked simply, the question raw and unguarded. Victoria met his eyes without flinching. Because I came here tonight to write a check, deliver a speech, and leave feeling nothing. I've spent years convincing myself that's enough, that success means never needing anyone, never letting anything touch you too deeply. Then you sang, and for the first time and longer than I care to admit, I felt something again. Real, painful, alive. Her voice cracked on the last word, so faintly most wouldn't have noticed. But Alex did. He saw the flicker of vulnerability behind the polished exterior, the same quiet ache he carried every day. I don't know how to thank someone for that, she finished. So I'm starting with what I know how to give. Sophia tugged at Alex's sleeve. Dad, can we say yes? Her voice was small but hopeful. Alex exhaled slowly, then nodded once. If it's really no strings, then yes. Thank you, truly. Victoria allowed herself a small, genuine smile, the kind that reached her eyes and softened the sharp lines of her face. It settled then. I'll have my assistant send the paperwork Monday morning. She glanced around, suddenly aware of the curious glances from nearby staff. I should let you to get home. It's late. As she turned to leave, Alex spoke again. Ms. Langford. She paused. If you ever want to hear it again, the song, you're welcome to come by our place. No gala required, just coffee and an old piano. Victoria looked back at him, surprise mingling with something warmer, something almost like hope. I might take you up on that, she said softly. Then she walked away, the click of her heels fading down the corridor, leaving behind the faint scent of her perfume and the promise of something neither of them had expected. That night, as Alex tucked Sophia into bed and replayed the evening in his mind, he realized the real surprise wasn't the applause or the scholarship. It was the crack that had appeared in the armor of the most untouchable woman in the city, and the quiet realization that maybe, just maybe, he had the voice to widen it. The weeks following the gala passed in a quiet rhythm that neither Alex nor Victoria had anticipated. Yet both found themselves unwilling to disrupt. At first, the changes were practical and contained. Paperwork arrived via courier the following Monday, crisp and official, transferring Sophia's tuition to a full scholarship underwritten by the Langford Foundation. A letter accompanied it, signed in Victoria's elegant, precise hand, as promised. No further action required on your part. Alex read it twice before filing it away, half expecting some hidden clause that would surface later. None did. Then came the music teacher, renowned concert pianist who had once performed at Carnegie Hall, now semi-retired and surprisingly willing to drive to their modest apartment twice a week. Sophia's eyes lit up brighter with every lesson. Her small fingers flew across the keys with new confidence. And Alex caught himself smiling at the sound drifting through the thin walls. Victoria's involvement might have ended there. A generous footnote in their lives, but it didn't. She began appearing at Sophia's school recitals, slipping into the back row of the modest auditorium wearing dark sunglasses and a simple, cashmere coat that somehow still looked expensive. She never announced herself, never sought credit. She simply sat, listened, and left before the applause died. Alex noticed her the first time, felt a strange warmth bloom in his chest when their eyes met across the crowded seats. The second time, he saved her a seat nearer the front. She hesitated, then took it. murmuring a quiet thank you that carried more gratitude than the word usually held. Conversations started small after a recital. In the hallway while parents milled about collecting coats. "She's improving so quickly," Victoria would say, voice soft. Alex would nod. "She practices every spare minute. Says it makes her feel closer to her mom." Victoria would look away then, as though the mention of loss touched something raw inside her. Over time, the exchanges lengthened. She asked about his nights at the school, how he managed the endless shifts. He asked carefully why a woman who commanded boardrooms still showed up alone to children's piano recitals. She answered honestly one rainy Tuesday evening, "Because I never had anyone show up for mine." That confession opened the door wider. They began meeting outside the school's orbit. Coffee First at a small, unpretentious cafe near the academy where no one recognized her face. She arrived in jeans and a plain sweater, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, looking almost ordinary. They talked about everything and nothing. The pressure of building an empire from scratch. The loneliness of being the one who always had to be strong. The way grief could settle into your bones like damp cold. Alex told her about Elena's final days, how music had been the only language left when words failed. Victoria listened without interruption, her usual armor of composure slipping until tears stood in her eyes. She confessed her own story in fragments: parents who chased wealth and left her behind at boarding schools. A childhood spent proving she didn't need anyone. A string of relationships that never lasted because vulnerability felt like weakness. One stormy Friday night, Victoria accepted Alex's long-standing invitation. Sophia had fallen asleep halfway through an old Disney movie they'd put on after dinner, curled on the couch under a faded quilt. The rain drummed steadily against the windows of the tiny apartment, turning the world outside into a soft blur. Alex and Victoria sat on the narrow porch, mugs of cheap instant coffee cooling between their hands. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating her face in brief, silver flashes. "I thought I had it all figured out," she said quietly, staring at the rain-slick street. "Control the variables. Keep everyone at arm's length. Stay safe. No one gets close enough to hurt you." Alex set his mug down. "Safe isn't the same as alive." She turned to him then, eyes searching his. "You make me want to risk it." The kiss happened slowly, almost inevitably. He reached for her hand first, threading their fingers together. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in, tentative at first, as though testing whether the world would collapse if she allowed herself to feel. When their lips met, it was gentle, questioning, then deeper, fiercer. Years of held-back emotion crashing through like the storm outside. His hands cupped her face. Hers tangled in his shirt. They kissed like people who had forgotten how rediscovering it in the taste of coffee and rain and shared loneliness. When they finally parted, foreheads resting together, breathing uneven, Victoria whispered against his mouth, "I don't know how to do this." Alex smiled softly. "Neither do I. But we've got time to figure it out." Inside, Sophia stirred but didn't wake. The rain continued to fall, washing the city clean. For the first time in years, two guarded hearts began to believe that maybe, just maybe, love didn't require perfection or wealth or certainty. It only required the courage to let the cracks show. The following spring arrived soft and hopeful, carrying the scent of blooming cherry blossoms across the evergreen Academy campus. The annual Gala returned, as predictable as the turning seasons. But this year, the air felt different, lighter, charged with an undercurrent of anticipation that had nothing to do with silent auctions or keynote speeches. The grand auditorium glittered once more under its constellation of chandeliers, its tables draped in ivory linen, centerpieces bursting with white roses and silver accents. Guests arrived in their finest. The same faces that had once whispered mockery, now exchanging knowing smiles and quiet congratulations. Word had spread, not through tabloids or social media. but through the slow, steady current of genuine admiration. The janitor who had silenced a room with his voice. The billionaire who had quietly begun rewriting her own story. Victoria Langford stood at the podium this time, not alone. She wore a deep emerald gown that caught the light like forest at dusk. Her hair loose in soft waves that framed a face no longer armored in perpetual composure. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the same authority it always had, but now threaded with warmth that made the words feel personal rather than performative. "Tonight," she began, "we celebrate legacy, not the kind measured in market caps or marble plaques, but the kind built in quiet moments, in voices that remind us what it means to be human." The room listened intently. No phones distracted, no side conversations murmured. She paused, then turned slightly toward the wings. "Last year, one man reminded me and all of us that some gifts don't need a price tag. Tonight, I'd like to invite him back. Not as a surprise, not as entertainment, but as family. Please welcome Alex Rivera." The applause began before Alex even appeared warm, sustained, devoid of irony. He stepped onto the stage in a simple charcoal suit Sophia had helped him choose. No longer the borrowed funeral shirt, but something new, something chosen for this moment. Beside him walked Sophia, 11 now, tall for her age, dressed in midnight blue with silver threads that shimmered as she moved. She carried no sheet music. She didn't need it anymore. At the grand piano position center stage, she sat with the calm assurance of someone who had practiced thousands of hours under the watchful eyes of the best teacher's money. And love could by Dodd, Alex approached the microphone. Glancing first at Sophia, then at Victoria standing just off to the side. Their eyes met, and in that brief exchange passed everything unspoken. Gratitude, trust, the slow miracle of two solitary lives finding each other. He smiled the small, private smile reserved only for the people who mattered most, then nodded to his daughter. Sophia's fingers found the keys, and the opening chords of Hallelujah filled the room, gentle at first, then swelling with quiet power. Alex's voice joined in on the second verse, richer now, steadier, carrying the same raw honesty that had stunned them all before, but tempered with joy instead of only sorrow. The audience sat spellbound once more, but this time tears fell openly, smiles breaking through. Victoria watched from the edge of the stage, arms loosely folded, eyes shining without shame. When the final chorus rose father and daughter in perfect harmony, the entire room stood as one. The ovation thundered longer than any speech or performance in the school's history, echoing off the high ceiling like a promise kept. Later, after the formalities ended and the crowd thinned into small groups lingering over dessert and conversation, Victoria found Alex and Sophia near the balcony doors overlooking the moonlit gardens. Sophia had slipped away briefly to hug a friend, leaving the two adults alone in the soft glow of string lights. Victoria stepped close, her hand finding his without hesitation. "You were right," she said quietly. "Legacy isn't money or power. It's this, Sophia, the way love doesn't ask for permission to change everything." Alex laced his fingers through hers. "We built something better than any empire," he replied, voice low. "Something real." She leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him coffee, faint soap, and the quiet strength that had drawn her in from the first note. Sophia returned then, slipping between them, one small hand in each of theirs. They walked out together into the cool night air, three figures framed against the glowing windows behind them. No longer separate stories, but one shared future. Inside the auditorium, the chandeliers dimmed slowly. Outside, the stars burned bright above Lahore's distant horizon and every city beyond, indifferent to wealth or status. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, two people who had once believed they would always walk alone discovered they never had to again. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Drop a comment with your favorite moment and subscribe to Drew Daily Stories for more heartwarming tales of love, second chances, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things. New stories drop daily. Don't miss the next one. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest surprises come from the people we least expect. See you in the next story.